"Do it, but please don't hurt me," said the Apache girl to the young cowboy. She lay bound between two fence posts, dust clinging to blood on her skin as the young cowboy stood frozen, rope still in his hands. The world around them held its breath, as if the wind itself waited to see whether mercy or fear would move him first. Something in his eyes said this moment wasn't about rope at all. Something else held his hand still. The rope creaked as it tightened. It wasn't pulled by force. Just the weight of her breathing made it strain against the wooden post. Flies buzzed in the heat, landing on dried blood as if invited. A horse stamped the ground nearby, its reins hanging loose, saddle still warm from the ride. The young cowboy stood a few steps away, boots planted in the dirt like roots. He didn't speak, he didn't blink. His hand hovered near the knot, but never touched it. The sun beat down on his hat brim, throwing his face into shadow. A dry gust rolled across the field, lifting dust in a slow spiral. It drifted toward her face. She didn't turn away. She just looked at him with wide, unblinking eyes. Her wrists were raw where the rope bit into skin, but she didn't struggle. Struggling made the fibers cut deeper. The sound of a church bell echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the ridge. One lonely chime, then silence again. The cowboy's fingers twitched at the sound, like someone waking from a dream. He knelt beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could see his jaw tighten. His breathing was steady, controlled, like someone holding back something that wanted to rise. A bead of sweat slid down the side of her face. Still, she didn't plead again. Only those first words remained hanging in the air like a curse. "Do it, but don't hurt me." The wind shifted, and from somewhere beyond the fence, boots crunched on gravel. The crunch of boots drew closer, slow steps, not rushed, not afraid. The young cowboy didn't look away from her, but his shoulders stiffened. "Someone's coming." The Apache girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Cut it before they do." He didn't move. His hand hovered near the knot again, fingers tense but hesitant. "I don't know who it is." She breathed shallow. "Anyone with rope. Anyone with paper. They don't ask." He glanced toward the fence line where the sound came from. "You think it's them?" She stared at the rope. "They always come back." The boot steps stopped just beyond the fence. Silence pressed against the air like a held breath. A shadow stretched across the dust, a man's shape, long coat, hat brim low. The cowboy spoke without looking back. "Stay still," she answered, bitter. "Rope keeps me still." A voice came from beyond the fence, calm, even. "You tied her clean." "Good work." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "I didn't tie her." The man stepped forward, dust puffing under his boots. He carried no rifle, just a small leather ledger bound with a brass clasp. His eyes were sharp, measuring. He looked at the girl, then at the rope. "State likes tidy work," he said. "Less mess to log." The cowboy stood straighter. "She isn't yours to log." The man flicked open the ledger with his thumb. "Unbound Apache," he said aloud, as if reading a line. "Unregistered. Resisting." The girl's jaw clenched. "Resisting breath. That a crime now?" The man didn't look at her. He dipped a pen in a small vial tied to his belt. "Name?" he asked. The cowboy stepped between them. "She doesn't give names." The man paused, ink dripping from the pen tip. "No name," he murmured, "no ledger entry. No ledger entry, no burial rights." The girl's eyes flickered. "Burial." The man finally looked at her. "Dead, you go in ground. Alive without record, you go nowhere." The cowboy's hand twitched near his knife. "No one dies here." The man closed the ledger part way. "Then sign," he said. "State marks mercy." The girl spat into the dust. "Mercy tied me here." The man's eyes narrowed. "No," he said. "Law tied you here." He lifted the pen again, pointing it toward the rope. "Cut it," he said, "and I write you both." The cowboy's voice dropped. "Write what?" The man raised one eyebrow. "Obstruction and joint custody." The girl glared. "I belong to no custody." The man gave a thin, professional smile. "Everything breathing belongs to someone." The cowboy's teeth clenched. "She belongs to breath." The man stepped closer. "Breath fades. Ledger stays." The cowboy looked at the rope, then back at the pen, then at the man. His voice was low. "Step back." The man didn't. "State doesn't step," he said. "State records." The girl looked at the cowboy. "You said you wouldn't freeze." His fingers curled slowly around the knife at his belt. The man saw the movement. His voice stayed calm. "You cut rope. I seal paper." The cowboy didn't blink. "You said state likes tidy work." The man nodded once. "We do." The cowboy drew the knife, not fast. Deliberate. He held it low, blade angled toward the knot. The man lifted the pen like a judge raising a gavel. "Cut," he said, "and you become entry." The girl watched both men through the dust. "Cut," she whispered. "Let him write." The cowboy met her eyes. Something steady passed between them, choice without words. Then he cut the rope. The fibers snapped with a sharp crack, ends fraying like torn breath. The girl pulled her hand free, blood rushing back through her wrist in a pulse of pain. The man's ledger snapped open again. He dipped the pen, slow and deliberate. Ink gathered at the tip, and a second set of boots crunched behind him. The cowboy turned slightly, just enough to see without taking his knife from his grip. The first man didn't look back. He kept the pen poised above the page, waiting for ink to fall. Another figure stepped through the fence line, taller, coat heavier. A badge glinted under his collar, not sheriff's iron, something quieter, administrative. The ledger man spoke without lifting his eyes. "You're late," the newcomer replied, voice smooth. "You started without seal." The pen paused. The ledger man corrected his posture, almost respectfully. "I was logging rope cut." The newcomer's eyes slid to the girl, then to the severed rope on the ground. "Cut rope implies intent." The cowboy's grip tightened. "My intent was breath." The newcomer regarded him without emotion. "Breath isn't legal ground." The girl stepped forward, wrists raw but unbound now. "Legal ground tied me here." The ledger man lifted the pen again. "Not tied now," he said. "Try cut by outside hand." The newcomer observed the cowboy with steady calm. "Then outside hand carries responsibility." The cowboy squared his shoulders. "I carry without record." The newcomer shook his head once. "Carrying without ledger is theft." The girl let out a short, dry breath. "Theft of what?" "Freedom." The newcomer turned to her. "Thy freedom without seal," he said, "is trespass." A gust of wind lifted the cut rope, flipping it across the ground like a dead snake. The ledger man scribbled something. Ink scratched across parchment. The cowboy stepped forward. "Don't write." The ledger man did not stop. "I record events," he said, "not requests." The girl spoke low. "Events lie if ink holds them." The newcomer gestured to the seal box slung at his side. "Ink lies less than steel." The cowboy lifted his knife slightly. "Steel speaks plain." The newcomer didn't flinch. "Plain speech still becomes paper." The ledger man tore a sheet cleanly from the book and held it between two fingers. The paper flapped once in the wind. The girl stared at it like it was a weapon. "Name?" the ledger man said. The cowboy answered immediately. "No names." The ledger man looked mildly bored. "Then I assign placeholder." The girl stepped closer. "I am not placeholder." The newcomer unsnapped the seal box lid. "Then give mark," he said, "thumb or palm." She raised her burned hand, palm blackened from the last branding. "I already marked," she said. The newcomer examined the injury with mild interest. "Improvised seal," he said. "Unsanctioned." The cowboy stepped closer to her, stance widening like a shield. "Her mark is hers." The ledger man placed the paper on a flat stone. "I only need one of you," he said. The girl looked at the cowboy. "He means you." The cowboy didn't move. The newcomer nodded once. "Cut rope makes you liable," he said. "You enter ledger now or she returns to post." The girl breathed sharply. "I don't go back to rope." The wind picked up again. Far off, a wagon rattled. Metal on wood. Something heavy being pulled across dry earth. The newcomer turned his head slightly. "Registrar Transport Quam," he said. "Arriving." The cowboy kept his knife ready. "Transport for what?" The ledger man tapped the paper with his pen. "For whoever refuses mark." The girl set her jaw. "Then burn the paper." The newcomer lifted the seal from the box. Brass caught the sunlight, cold and unheated. "Paper burns," he said. "Seal does not." The cowboy took one step forward, slowly. "So bring heat." The ledger man nodded toward the wagon sound. "It carries coal." The girl's heartbeat quickened. "Coal means seal press," she said. The newcomer confirmed it with silence. The cowboy scanned the horizon. Dust cloud. A wagon, small and distant, but coming. The ledger man placed the paper against the stone fully, flattening it with his palm. The newcomer held the seal like a judge holds sentence. The wagon creaked closer. Dust rose behind it. The girl whispered to the cowboy, "They won't leave without Mark." He replied quietly, "Then we don't leave either." The ledger man dipped the pen one last time. Ink glistened on the tip. The seal-bearer raised the brass ring. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a bell rang once. Not church. Lighter. Sharper. A signal. The ledger man paused mid-stroke. The newcomer looked up. Hooves. Not from the wagon. From the right. Another rider approaching fast. Not theirs. Not expected. The seal froze above the page. The hooves cut through the dust in a hard rhythm, faster than the wagon, lighter than the registrar's mounts. The ledger man looked up, pen suspended. The newcomer's hand hovered near the seal box, but did not open it fully. The rider crested the ridge, one silhouette against the sky, cloak snapping like torn paper in the wind. The girl narrowed her eyes. Not theirs. The cowboy shifted his stance subtly. Not ours either. The ledger man squinted toward the ridge. No seal on that rider. The newcomer adjusted his grip on the brass ring. Unregistered presence. The rider came closer. No torch, no badge, no standard. Just a worn coat, horse ribs showing through hide. Saddle hardly more than leather scraps. Yet he rode straight and purposeful. The ledger man murmured, more to himself. No paperwork, no escort. The girl stepped forward a fraction. Free. The newcomer shook his head. Unlogged, he corrected. That is not free. The cowboy watched the rider descend toward them. Maybe it is. The wagon behind them rattled closer, slow and heavy, but all eyes shifted to the lone rider instead. The registrar lifted his pen toward the incoming silhouette. State boundaries enforced, he called. Identify or halt. The rider did not halt. The ledger man wet his pen again, as if ready to record either compliance or charge. Rider refuses command, he said aloud. The seal-bearer tightened his grip. The cowboy leaned close to the girl. Stay near me. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the approaching figure, reading something in the posture. Not law, not fear, something like memory. The rider slowed just enough to speak without shouting. His voice carried through dust and wind. I know ledger claims me, he said. No paper speaks my breath. The ledger man frowned. Then you trespass. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the earth soft as ash. He stood with empty hands, no weapon drawn. Only a strip of cloth tied around his wrist, frayed like something torn free long ago. The girl stared at that strip. That rope. The rider looked at the cut rope beside her feet, then at the burned knot marks on her wrists. Same bond, he said quietly. Same cut. The ledger man stepped forward. Do you present name? The rider shook his head once. I present witness. The newcomer brandished the seal ring. Witnesses sign too. The rider met his gaze. I sign with breath. The registrar's face tightened. Breath fades, he repeated. Record remains. The rider knelt beside the broken rope. He gathered one frayed end in his hand. Rope once bound me, he said. I carry its memory, not its name. The girl took a step toward him, something fierce in her eyes. You cut your own? He nodded. I burned it in coals, took scar instead of seal. She raised her scorched palm slightly. Same scar. The ledger man's pen hesitated over the parchment. Two unmarked, one injured, one obstructing, he recited. The cowboy moved between the ledger man and the girl. No record, he said. Not of us. Not of him. The rider looked at the cowboy, then at the girl, then at the approaching wagon. You stand at a door, he he said. "They will shut it in ink," the girl answered, voice steady. We walked past door. The rider slowly reached to his saddlebag and withdrew something small, a chunk of cooled coal wrapped in cloth. He held it out. "Keep fire," he said. "Not seal." The girl reached for it, then froze, because the registrar raised his hand sharply. "No further contact," he said. "Outside interference logged." The ledger man lowered the pen. "Outside rider now included in custody group." The cowboy's voice deepened. "You don't group us." The registrar stepped forward, eyes hard now. "State groups all be," he said. "Breath does not choose." The lone rider didn't move. "Breath always chooses," he said. "Paper just writes after." The wagon rumbled closer, wheels grinding gravel. Coals for the seal glowed through its slatted sides. The registrar pointed to the ground at the center of them all. "Seal will press here," he said. "All present will mark." The girl closed her fingers around the coal the rider offered, not burning like before, but still warm, like a heartbeat trapped in stone. She lifted it slowly. "You burn us," she said, "so we remember your law." The registrar nodded once. "Then it is mercy to remember." She held the coal to her chest. "I'll burn my own memory." The registrar raised the seal high. The wagon reached the circle. The coals inside roared to life as the lid was lifted. Heat washed across the dust. The brass ring glowed again. The girl looked at the cowboy. The cowboy looked at the rider, 3 standing, no names, no ink. The registrar stepped forward, seal in hand. "Prepare," he said. The coal in her hand sparked once. Something in the wind shifted. Then a crack of thunder split the sky, not storm. Gunfire, one shot, from the dark behind the wagon, closer than any of them expected. The sound split the air, sharp and sudden, a single rifle crack, not warning, not meant to scare, meant to hit. The seal-bearer flinched first, his hand jerked, and the glowing brass ring nearly fell from his grip. The registrar turned, eyes narrow, scanning the dark beyond the wagon. The ledger man held his pen still, ink trembling at the tip. "Source?" he called. No answer, just the horse snorting, uneasy. The wagon mules stamped and tossed their heads. The cowboy shifted his stance, knife angled low. "Not your rider," he said. The registrar raised a hand to halt his men. "Hold formation," he commanded. "No return fire yet." The newcomer by his side whispered, eyes sharp. Shot came from west flank. The girl looked at the lone rider. "Yours?" The rider shook his head once. "Not mine." The registrar glanced at the girl's burned palm, then at the coal she still held. "Drop that," he said, hands visible. She didn't move. "You aim seal," she said. "I hold fire." Another shot cracked, closer this time. It struck the wagon wheel, splintering wood. The mules screamed, bolting sideways. The seal flared white-hot again as it nearly slipped. The man holding it stumbled, catching it awkwardly. "Heat's rising," he shouted. The registrar gritted his teeth. "Coals are ready," he said. "Complete the press." The cowboy stepped in front of the girl, knife glinting in the firelight. "Press us, and you burn with us." The registrar didn't back down. "State burns clean." A third shot rang. This one hit the dirt between them, spitting dust into the air. The ledger man jumped back, dropping ink across the parchment. Black stain bled through the page like a wound spreading under skin. He stared at the spill. "Record compromised," he muttered. The girl's voice cut through. "Paper bleeds fast." From the shadows near the far fence, a figure moved, too fast to see clearly, just a silhouette slipping between fence posts like smoke. The lone rider spoke under his breath. "That's no Clark." The registrar signaled his men. 2 riders broke formation, lanterns swinging, trying to flank the gunman's position. The cowboy kept his eyes on the seal, still glowing in the other man's hand. "You still pressing?" The registrar lifted his chin. "Law does not pause for chaos." The girl stepped forward. "Chaos doesn't ask permission." The seal glowed brighter, metal nearly white. The handler winced as it scorched his glove. "Now," he said. "A mark before more shots." The ledger man lifted his ruined page. "Sign or print as he said. Do it." The cowboy's voice dropped. "No." The lawman holding the seal stepped toward the girl. He extended the glowing ring. Heat shimmered in the air between them. The girl held up her burned palm again. "You want a mark?" she said. "Take it from fire." Another shot split the air, this one fast and clean. It struck the seal-bearer's forearm. The glowing ring flew from his grip, spinning through the air like a wheel of light. It landed in the mud beside the small fire pit, hissing, half-buried, still glowing like a dying sun. Smoke rose. The registrar stepped back for the first time. The girl looked at the cowboy. "That wasn't luck." The lone rider nodded slowly. "Someone else refuses." The registrar stared at the fallen seal, then at his ledger, now ruined by spilled ink and rain. He looked up, anger controlled but sharp. "Find the shooter," he ordered. Two riders sprinted toward the fence line. The registrar turned back to them. "This changes nothing." The girl's voice was steady fire. "This changes everything." Hoofbeats sounded again, but not from their side this time. From behind the ridge, not one horse, several, and not wagons, riders, fast, no torches, no seals, just dust rising like a storm front of breath without paper. Hoofbeats rolled over the ridge like thunder, not the slow, measured rhythm of registrars. These horses moved with urgency, fast, uneven, wild. Dust rose behind them in a long plume that caught the last light of day and turned it into a burning trail. The registrar snapped his attention to the hill. "Identify riders," he ordered. The ledger man squinted, ink-stained page still clenched in his hand. "No state lanterns," he said. "No marked saddles." The cowboy stepped slightly in front of the girl again. "They don't ride with seals." The girl's eyes narrowed. "Maybe they ride with scars." The lone rider beside them nodded once. "Some cut their own rope," he said. "Some cut others free." The registrar raised his hand to his men. "Hold your lines," he warned. "Do not fire unless engaged." The seal-bearer, clutching his wounded arm, hissed under his breath. "Why they shot us first?" The registrar didn't look at him. Law responds with precision, not panic. The wagon mules stirred nervously, hooves stamping mud. The coals inside still glowed, but rain had begun to dampen their fury. The riders crested the ridge. 5 silhouettes emerged, then 7, then more. No uniform, no formation. They did not ride in rows like lawmen. They moved like wind across stone, scattered but unified by direction alone. The ledger man licked rain from his lip. "Unregulated group," he muttered. "Possible insurgent cell." The girl spoke quietly, or breath unbound. The cowboy's grip tightened on his knife. "They're coming straight through." The registrar stepped forward, voice rising. "Approaching riders," he called. "State territory. Declare intent." The riders did not slow. The lead horse leapt the narrow ditch at the fence line, hooves splashing mud. A rider in a dust-stained coat leaned low over the saddle, face hidden by rain and shadow. The others followed, forming no clear pattern. The registrar's men shifted, uncertain. "They're not circling," one whispered. "They're not stopping." The registrar lifted the seal box, even without the ring inside. "This is state ground," he declared. "Submit or be detained." The riders did not answer. The girl watched them draw closer, rain slicking across their coats. "Do you see it?" she said softly. The cowboy glanced at her. "What?" She nodded toward their wrists. No rope, no ink, only burn marks, flesh scarred in rings where seal had once been forced. Some fresh, some long healed into pale circles, like moons under their skin. The lone rider stepped beside her, voice quiet. "They carry their refusal with them," he said. The registrar saw it now too. His eyes hardened. "Illegals," he said. "Fugitives from record." The lead outsider rider finally slowed, reining his horse just within speaking distance. Rain dripped from his hat brim. He said nothing, just looked at the scorched earth where the seal had fallen. The ledger man lifted the ruined page. "You come to interfere with state process." No reply. The registrar tried again. "Identify or be marked." The lead rider reached slowly into his coat. The registrar's men tensed, hands going to rifles. The rider didn't draw a weapon. He pulled something else, a folded strip of burned parchment. He held it up in the rain. The ink was scorched through, the state seal barely visible, warped, blackened. The registrar stared. "You destroyed it." The rider spoke at last. "It tried to write me," he said. "I burned the page." The registrar's jaw clenched. "All of you," he said, scanning the group, "stand to be processed." The girl stepped forward, palm still blackened from her own act. "Process this," she said, holding her burn to the rein. The lead rider did the same. One by one, his group followed, raising their scarred wrists in silent display. Rain flowed over their burns, turning ash into streaks. The registrar looked at the growing number of raised hands. "You think scars free you?" The lead rider answered. "Scars remind us we free ourselves." The registrar glanced at his own men. Discipline flickered. Doubt crept in like a draft beneath a door. The ledger man held his ruined ink sheet with both hands, as if considering whether it was still worth saving. The seal lay cooling in the mud, no longer glowing. The girl looked at the cowboy, then at the lone rider, then at the growing circle of scarred hands around them. Something shifted in the air. Not fear, not surrender. Recognition. The registrar felt it too. His voice dropped to a warning. "If you walk now," he said, "you walk as enemies of record." The cowboy met his gaze. "If record stands against breath," he said, "then we walk anyway." The registrar raised his hand. Riders on both sides stilled. Rain poured down. Then a torch behind them sputtered back to life, not by accident. Someone relit it. A torch means light, and light means witness. The torch that had fallen earlier hissed in the rain, then flared back to life. Someone had forced flame against wet wood, coaxing it to burn. A registrar rider stood behind it, shielding it with his coat, determination in every movement. The registrar saw it and straightened. "Witness flame restored," he said. "Record stands." The girl stared at the torch. "They light it again." The lone rider beside her spoke low. "They refuse to let night hide them." The cowboy's voice was flat. "They want their law seen." The registrar lifted his ledger, pages streaked with mud and ink. "State acknowledges interruption," he announced. "Process resumes under flame." The group of scar-bearers shifted their horses subtly. They didn't back away, they simply held position like stone, letting rain roll off their coats. One of them spoke from the saddle, voice low but clear. "No flame writes us." The registrar didn't look at him. "Flame is not for writing," he said. "It is for witnessing refusal." The girl stepped forward, palm still clutching the coal the lone rider gave her. "You speak of witnessing," she said, "but you don't see." The registrar met her eyes. "I see defiance," he said. "I see obstruction." She lifted the coal to her chest. Rain struck it, steam rising like breath. "Then sea breath," she said. The registrar said nothing. The seal-bearer, still holding his wounded arm, pointed to the fallen brass ring half buried near the fire pit. "Ring is cooled," he said. "Ready to press again." One of the scarred riders called from his saddle. "You press that ring," he said, "and every scar here becomes fire." The registrar raised his pen. "You threaten law." The rider shook his head. Rain streamed off his hat brim. "No," he said. "We warn it." The ledger man hesitated, pen hanging above a fresh sheet. His fingers trembled. The ink vial at his belt was half spilled from earlier shots. Ink and rainwater mixed into a dark stain down his coat. The registrar noticed his hesitation. "Right," he commanded. The ledger man swallowed. "What entry?" The registrar's eyes never left the girl and the cowboy. "Write that they resist flame," he said. "Write that they deny seal." The ledger man dipped the pen, but the ink was thin, washed by rain. It dripped too quickly. The girl watched the ink fall. "Even your ink runs," she said. The registrar's expression tightened. The cowboy spoke low. "Storm doesn't choose sides," he said, "but it washes pages." The registrar turned his head sharply toward the torch. "Keep flame high," he ordered. The rider shielding it shifted position, cloak flapping, torchlight flickering across his face. A moment of stillness followed. Rain drummed. Horses snorted. Breath visible in the cooling air. Then, the lone rider who had first arrived stepped forward, coal in his palm glowing faintly like a captured ember. He looked at the registrar. "You want witness?" he asked. "I give witness." The registrar narrowed his eyes. The rider lifted the coal high. The light of it met the torch across the clearing. Scarred riders raised burned wrists. The girl lifted her scorched palm. The cowboy stood beside her, knife lowered but not sheathed. Across from them, torch, ledger, seal, flame. 2 fires, 2 forms of record. The registrar spoke slowly, each word careful. "Are you declaring rebellion?" the girl answered before the cowboy or rider could speak. "No," she said. "We declare breath." The registrar lifted the pen, point toward sky. "And breath," he said, "will be written." The lone rider took 1 step closer. "Then write this," he said. He crushed the coal in his fist. Ember sparks burst from his hand, mixing with rain, tiny lights scattering upward like fireflies trying to escape gravity. The torchbearer shielded his flame from the sparks instinctively, turning away. In that opening, the girl moved. Not to strike, not to run. She stepped between torch and seal. The registrar's eyes widened. Her palm, still burned black, rose toward the flame that represented law. She pressed her hand toward it, not touching yet, but close enough for heat to meet heat. The registrar tightened his grip on the pen. "Stop," he said, "or I press seal now." She looked at him through smoke and rain. "Then press it," she said. "But know this—" Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried further than a shout. "If you press your seal into this land again, we press back." A gust of wind hit. The torch guttered, flame stretching, and for a breathless moment it seemed it might go out. The torch flame bent sideways under the wind, stretching thin, flickering dangerously. The registrar's rider struggled to shield it, cloak pressed tight around the wood like a dying lantern. The registrar extended his arm sharply. "Keep that flame alive," he ordered. The rider hunched lower, voice strained. "It won't hold," he said. "Wind's too hard." The girl stood inches away, her burned palm still raised, rain boiling into steam where heat met open skin. "Let it go," she said quietly. "Let night take it." The registrar didn't look at her. "Law doesn't die in rain." The cowboy stayed just behind her, knife low, eyes locked on every small movement around the flame. "You act like fire makes truth," he said. The registrar raised his pen like a blade. "Fire shows who resists truth." The scarred riders behind them shifted in their saddles, horses stamping wet earth. One of them called out, "It's just flame," he said, "not judgment." The registrar snapped back. "Flame witnesses." The lone rider spoke then calmly. "Witness can lie." The wind gusted again. The flame bent harder, almost horizontal now. Yellow light stretched thin, like a held breath ready to break. The registrar shouted to his men, "Lanterns forward!" 2 lantern-bearing riders dismounted and rushed to flank the torch, raising their lamps to feed it light like fuel. Flames from the lanterns flickered weakly. The ledger man stood back, ink sheet limp in his hand. "Page is ruined," he said under his breath. The girl heard him. "So hide the book," she said. "Let night write instead." The registrar ignored her. Rain streamed down his face without breaking his composure. "We rewrite," he said. "We always rewrite." One of the lanterns flickered out with a soft sigh, its flame drowned by rain. The rider cursed under his breath, slamming the lamp against his leg. The scarred riders watched from the ridgeline, silent and still. Their presence felt like a tide waiting to break against a sand wall. The seal-bearer knelt near the fallen brass ring, reaching for it even though his arm bled. "Seal can still press," he insisted, voice tight. "Heat it again, just heat it again." The girl took a small step, voice sharp like flint striking steel. "Heating it won't make it right." The registrar's eyes narrowed. "It makes it official." She stared at him with a kind of fierce sorrow. "Official doesn't mean true," the cowboy added quietly. "And truth doesn't need seal." Lightning flashed somewhere distant, illuminating the soaked plains in a momentary sheet of white. In that heartbeat of clarity, everyone stood frozen, torch bent, seal cooling, ledger bleeding ink, free riders watching. The registrar saw the faces of those around him, not rebels, not criminals, but people standing in rain with scars instead of signatures. His hand tightened around the pen. "Enough," he said, low and cold. "Bring coals." The wagon, still smouldering inside, creaked as the coal box was dragged closer. Wet planks hissed under the effort, steam rising like ghosts. The seal-bearer reached with shaking fingers for the ring in the mud. The girl saw the movement. She stepped between him and the brass. One step, no weapon, just refusal. The seal-bearer froze. The registrar gave a final command, voice cutting clean through the rain. "Step aside," he said, "or be taken." The scarred riders behind them shifted, hooves scraping. One called out, tone like thunder waiting to fall. "She steps aside for no man," he warned. "Not for seal, not for ink." The registrar's men readied themselves. Lantern light wavered on rifle barrels. The cowboy spoke once, quiet but unshakable. "We don't step. We walk." The registrar lifted his pen one last time. "Then walk into record," he said. "There is no other path." The girl's answer cut through the storm. "There always is." Wind rose again. The torch flame stretched, then snapped. It went out. Smoke curled upward like a final breath. Everything stopped. No flame, no witness, only rain. Someone whispered from the free riders. A single word carried on the wind like a verdict. "Unwritten." The registrar's pen hovered in the air, dripping rainwater and ink, uncertain. Then, from the darkness behind the registrar's men, something moved. Not a rider this time, something small. A child's voice, low, shaky, spoke from the shadows. "Don't press it." Every head turned. From behind the coal wagon, a small figure stepped forward through the rain. Barefoot, clothes soaked, dark hair plastered against her face. An Apache child, no more than 10, eyes wide but steady. She held out both hands, rope burns still visible, thin wrists trembling but held high. "Don't press it," she repeated. "Please." The registrar's expression flickered, the slightest hesitation. There and gone. He adjusted his coat, composing himself. "Child," he said. Tone clipped. "This is legal matter. Step back." She didn't move. "If you press it," she said, voice thin but clear, "you press it on us too." The ledger man blinked, ink-streaked paper hanging limp in his hand. "What's a child doing here?" he muttered. The girl, scorched palm still lifted, stepped closer to the child slowly. "She's rope-marked too," she said. "She's witness." The registrar's jaw tightened. "Witnesses do not interrupt state process." The cowboy spoke quietly. "She's not interrupting," he said. "She's reminding." The registrar glanced at him, impatience creeping into his controlled tone. "Of what?" The cowboy's voice remained steady. "That seal burns more than skin." The child looked at the seal in the mud. Steam coiled around it like breath in cold air. "My sister," she said, "was pressed." Silence fell like a hammer. The seal-bearer, arm still bleeding, swallowed hard. "Pressed entries receive care," he said automatically. "Marked ones are given rations." The child shook her head. "They fed her," she said. Then they took her name. The registrars exchanged glances, a brief flicker of unease. The girl knelt beside the child. "What's your name?" she whispered. The child hesitated, then shook her head. "No name," she said quietly. They took it. The ledger man lowered his pen a fraction. "Unidentified minor. No record." The girl placed her burned palm over the child's small rope scars. "She doesn't need record," she said. "She needs breath." The registrar pointed the pen at the child without writing. "Without entry," he said. "She is invisible." The lone rider stepped forward. "Invisible can still walk," he said. The registrar's eyes narrowed. "Invisible can still be taken." The child looked up at him. "You take us with paper," she said, "but we walk faster than ink." Rain pattered against the silent circle. Horses snorted. The fire in the coal box flickered under wet ash. The registrar turned toward his men. "Retrieve seal," he ordered. "We press group under clause." The ledger man hesitated. "Pressing minors," he said carefully. Requires double authorization. The registrar's patience cracked just slightly. Then consider this authorization. The child clutched the girl's arm. "Don't let them," she whispered. "Don't let them write me." The girl's voice turned to iron. "They won't." The registrar stepped toward the seal. The cowboy moved in front of him. "You lay that ring," he said, "and you brand a child." The registrar didn't blink. "Law doesn't see age," he said. "Only entry." One of the scarred riders called out through the rain. "Then law is blind." The registrar's gaze hardened. "Step aside," he warned, "or we take all of you as group custody." The lone rider lifted his chin, rain dripping from his hat. "Group stands." The girl drew the child closer, shielding her with her own body. The registrar raised the pen. "Final announcement," he declared. "State presses seal now." The seal-bearer bent over the ring, fingers closing around the cooled metal. The child clutched the girl tighter. Thunder rolled, not from sky this time, from ground. A low rumble. Then, the sound of more hooves approaching, distant but building like a storm behind hills. Not one group, multiple. Voices carried on wind, speaking in Apache, harsh, clear, coming fast. The ledger man looked up, eyes wide. "More riders," he said. "They're not state." The registrar turned sharply, coat whipping in the wind. "From where?" The girl looked beyond the ridge, and for the first time a flicker of something passed through her eyes. Not fear, recognition. The rumble grew louder, rising like a heartbeat through wet ground, hooves striking mud. Apache voices riding the wind, some sharp, some chanting low like thunder rolling over stone. The registrar's men tightened their grip on their lanterns and rifles. "Multiple riders incoming," one called. The registrar stayed rigid. "Form containment line," he ordered. "Do not fire unless ordered." The seal-bearer froze beside the ring. His wounded arm trembled. He looked toward the ridge. "They're not stopping." The girl stood tall beside the child, rain-soaked hair clinging to her face. "They don't stop for ledgers," she said. The lone rider stepped forward, eyes fixed on the distant shapes. "They ride for their own," he said, "not for law." The cowboy watched the approaching dust plume. "More than 10, he muttered. "No formation." The ledger man flipped open his book with shaking hands. Ink bled through the page. "We list them," he said weakly. "Before they—" The registrar cut him off. "You list nothing until I say—" The ledger's pen stopped midway, rain dripping from its nib, written lines blurred into ink rivers. The first of the Apache riders broke through the ridge, painted faces streaked by rain, bone charms hanging from bridles, horses lathered but strong. They rode low, moving like shadows between lightning flashes, no torches, no lanterns, only breath and storm. One rider at the front carried something in his hand, not a weapon, a length of rope, cut clean at both ends. The girl inhaled slowly. "They saw the fire," she whispered. The registrar lifted his pen again, voice growing harder, louder, like a man trying to hold back a tide with a single command. "You enter state recording zone," he called. "You will halt and present marks." The Apache riders did not halt. The lead horse came forward, stopping just at the edge of the circle. Its rider sat straight in the saddle, rain streaming down his face. He looked not at the registrar. He looked at the girl, at her palm, at her scar. Then he looked at the rope in the mud. The child beside her clutched tighter. "They came back," she whispered. The registrar stepped forward, pen raised like a seal. "This ground is under ledger," he declared. "All breath here must be written." The Apache rider slowly dismounted. He did not speak. He walked to the fallen ring in the mud. Every registrar rifle shifted slightly, not quite raised, not quite lowered. The rider crouched. He looked at the seal. His hand hovered, but he didn't touch it. Instead, he pressed his own palm into the mud beside it and lifted it high. Mud streaked. Rain washed lines across his skin, like a mark that refused to be clean. The registrar's voice hardened. "You defy seal," the Apache rider finally spoke. "I bury it." The registrar tried to step past him. "Seal does not bury," he said through clenched teeth. "It stamps." The Apache rider stepped in front of him. "And we do not stamp," he said. We rise. The free riders behind them and the scarred ones raised their burned wrists again, echoing him like a silent choir of refusal. The girl lifted hers too, palm scarred and blackened, rain turning ash into streaks like war paint. The child followed, lifting small hands with rope scars still raw. The cowboy stood beside them. He had no scar, no brand, but he raised his hand anyway, not claiming mark, rejecting it. The registrar looked around. Rain, scarred hands, Apache riders encircling, law flickering like a dying torch, ink smeared, seal cooling, record shaking. He gripped his pen so tightly his knuckles went white. He lifted it one last time. A voice called from the Apache riders, firm and loud. "Right now," it said. The registrar turned. The rider stepped forward, palm still wet with mud. "Write this," he said. He placed that mud-marked hand flat against the registrar's open ledger. Ink and mud collided, spreading dark across the page like a storm swallowing script. The registrar's pen froze mid-air. Paper bled black. And the page of the official page untore under his palm. The registrar stared, at the ruin, at the scarred hands, at law undone by mud and rain. For the first time, he did not speak. Then, a second Apache rider dismounted. He held something behind his back, wrapped in cloth. He stepped toward the girl and unwrapped it, a state-issued seal, broken clean in two. The broken seal glinted in the rain, two jagged halves of brass, split clean like bone. The Apache rider held both pieces in open palms, letting the rain wash over them as if cleansing metal of its claim. The registrar stared at the ruined seal. His breath came slow, measured, but something in his posture faltered. "State property," he said quietly. "Defacement is a punishable act." The Apache rider didn't flinch. "Seal tried to brand us," he said. "It broke instead." The registrar's jaw tightened. "Seal does not break," he insisted. "It is forged to endure." The rider tossed one half at his feet. The metal landed in mud with a dull thud. "Then your forge lied." The ledger man looked down at his ink-smeared page, rain-washing characters into unreadable streams. "Ledger is compromised," he said weakly. The registrar snapped without looking at him. "Rewrite it." The ledger man stared at the ruined sheet. "Rewrite what?" he asked. "There is no clean line left." The girl stepped forward, standing between the child and the seal fragment. "Maybe that is the clean line," she said. The cowboy spoke low. "No ink holds what's happening here." The seal-bearer, still bleeding, reached toward the broken seal, half as if trying to gather it back. His fingers hovered, shaking. "It can be repaired," he muttered. "Metal rebinds under flame." The Apache rider pushed his hand back with a single look. "No flame will shape it right again," he said. "It remembers being broken." The registrar slowly closed the ledger, rain-soaked leather slapping shut like a judge closing a case. "All of you," he said, "will be marked for destruction of state authority." The scarred riders behind him stirred, but none moved forward. Their silence was heavy, not afraid, a silence that said we've already been marked. The girl spoke, voice steady. "So you think Mark frightens us?" The registrar looked at her burned palm. "Fear is not the goal," he said. "Order is." The lone rider stepped between them now. "Order built on chains is just a quieter war," he said. The registrar turned to him. "You speak like one who once served ledger." The rider gave a slow nod. "I did," he said, "until I saw how ink kills slower than bullets." The registrar's gaze flickered. For a heartbeat, a crack appeared, a memory maybe, or doubt, but he sealed it shut. "Law holds," he said, "or everything burns." The Apache rider, holding the other half of the seal, lifted it. "Good," he said. "We choose burn." The registrar stepped back. "You choose ruin," he warned. The girl lifted her burned palm beside him. "We already carry ruin," she said. "We just refuse to carry it under your name." The wind picked up again, swirling rain around the broken seal on the ground. The flame in the torch guttered low, fighting to stay alive. The registrar looked once at that failing torch, at the broken ring, at the ledger dissolving in his hands. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached inside his coat and produced a secondary seal ring, smaller, unused, untouched by coal. A gasp moved through the registrar's men. The seal-bearer stiffened. "You kept reserve," he said, half in awe, half in dread. The registrar held it high. "State carries more than one fire." The girl's eyes narrowed. "So you bring a new seal," she said, "to take the place of the one we broke." The registrar nodded once. "Law adapts," he said. The cowboy stepped forward. "And we do not." She stepped beside him. "We break this one too." The Apache riders shifted like a wave moving forward. Their horses pawed the ground. Scarred wrists lifted. The registrar's eyes hardened, voice rising above the rain like a gavel. "Then come," he said, "and test your breath against law a second time." He lifted the fresh seal toward the coal. The wagon doors creaked open. Inside, beneath soaked canvas, coals still burned. Faint, but burning. He moved to press the ring forward. Rain sizzled on the iron. The child beside the girl whispered, "Don't let them make another." The ring touched the coal. Steam erupted in a hiss. The registrar's eyes never left theirs. Then the seal began to glow. The second seal heats. Law tries again. Breath answers again. Everything leans toward breaking. Steam curled up from the coal bed like a spirit emerging from burial. The registrar held the smaller seal ring in the flames, watching the brass shift from dull metal to glowing ember. His face reflected its light, rain streaking down his features like melted ink. The seal-bearer, still bleeding from the arm, whispered hoarsely, "Fresh ring holds better heat. New marks last longer." The registrar didn't look at him. "This one won't break," he said. "This one finishes the record." The girl stood unflinching in the rain. "You finished nothing." The registrar raised the glowing seal a little higher. "This ring carries final authority," he said. "Once it presses, no man erases it." She lifted her palm and burned, blackened, rain-washing ash from it. "No man ever owned this," she said, "and no ring ever will." The cowboy stood to her right, knife still at his side. He didn't lift it. He didn't threaten. He just stood ready. "You press that seal," he said. "You'll press it against bone." The seal's glow deepened to a fierce orange, heat radiating out like a heartbeat. The rain hissed on its surface. The registrar spoke again, voice calm as judgment. "This is the last offer," he said. "Submit to mark, walk under care, or be taken." The Apache riders tightened their circle. Their horses pawed the mud. Scarred wrists rose like a forest of silent testimony. One rider called forward, "You take no one today." The registrar stepped toward the girl and the cowboy, seal burning in his hand. "Bring forward the injured," he said. "He receives first mark." The wounded man, still lying under the coat, stirred weakly, breath labored. His eyes flickered open just enough to see the glowing ring. He whispered one broken word, "No." The seal-bearer moved toward him. The girl stepped in his path. "He breathes without your seal," she said. The registrar gestured to two of his men. "Remove obstruction." The cowboy's stance shifted. "No one touches him." A registrar rider lifted his rifle, not pointing to kill, but to clear a path. The registrar nodded once. The cowboy didn't lift his blade, but lowered his center of gravity, feet firmly planted. "Try," he said quietly. The registrar's eyes flicked to him. "Law does not try," he said. "Law executes." The Apache rider who held the broken seal half-stepped forward, rain darkening his coat. He held the shards up. "You tried once," he said. Seal broke. The registrar's gaze hardened. "This ring is stronger." The girl lifted her palm higher. "So is this fire." The child beside her looked at the glowing ring, then at the seal half in the rider's hand. She whispered, voice trembling, "They will press it on us." The girl leaned down just enough to meet her eyes. "Then we press too," she said. "Not with brass, with breath." The registrar turned to his men. "Advance." The men stepped forward through the rain, lanterns flickering against their coats. The free riders on the ridge dismounted as one. They moved quickly, quietly, without orders, each rider stepping forward and placing their burned palm in the mud, one after another, marking the ground with rings of flesh and ash. Mud prints, ash prints, scars pressed into earth. The seal-bearer stopped, staring at them. "They mark ground," he said, confused. "Why?" the lone rider answered. "We claim land by breath," he said, "not by paper." The registrar ignored him. "This soil is state property," the girl's voice cut sharp. "And we bleed on it." The registrar took another step, seal glowing like a brand. "Then bleed under record," he said. The cowboy stepped just enough to block his path. "No more records," he said. "No more rings." The registrar's expression stayed cold. "You don't choose." The Apache riders had finished marking the mud. Dozens of palm prints formed a ragged circle on the ground, a burned ring echo, but imperfect, broken, alive. The registrar saw it, mud instead of ink. "Unrecognized symbol," he said. "Invalid." The girl spoke. "Invalid makes us free." The ledger man stared at the prints. His ink sheet was ruined. His pen dripped nothing but water. I cannot copy that," he said. The registrar pointed at him. "Then ignore it." The ledger man hesitated. "It's there." The registrar's tone sharpened like steel. "I said ignore." The ledger man swallowed hard and looked down at his blank page. The seal-bearer, still holding his wounded arm tight, moved again toward the injured man, seal now glowing like a coal in the registrar's hand. The girl's voice rose. "Don't touch him." The registrar raised his seal. "He receives care." The cowboy stepped forward. "He receives nothing from you." The registrar met his gaze. "Then he receives pain." The seal moved downward. The child cried out, "No!" The girl lunged, not to strike, but to place her burned palm directly over the wounded man's chest, shielding him. The registrar's seal stopped inches away from her hand, heat radiating off it. Smoke curled between brass and flesh. She didn't move. The registrar's voice was low, almost respectful, but cold. "Move," he said, "or I press through you." She didn't blink. "Press." The registrar hesitated, the weight of every rider's eyes on him. Law, scar, breath, seal, all waiting to see if he would brand a woman shielding a dying man. He gripped the seal tighter. The Apache riders stepped closer. The registrar's men steadied their rifles. The air felt stretched, thin, like something ready to break with one wrong breath. The rain hissed louder. Steam rose from the coal bed. The seal glowed brighter. The registrar lowered it a fraction. The girl didn't flinch. The cowboy stepped beside her, palm open, offering flesh instead of submission. The child stepped too, tiny wrists lifted, rope scars exposed. The Apache riders knelt and pressed their palms into the mud again, deeper this time, breath marking earth. The registrar's arm trembled, whether from rain or conflict, no one could tell. He brought the seal down. The glow nearly touched her burned palm. The heat singed the air between them, and a hand shot out from behind the registrar, grabbing his forearm. Not a rider's hand, not Apache. One of his own men. Rain dripping from his hat, eyes steady, voice quiet as thunder. "Sir," he said, "if you press that, you press us all." The registrar froze. The glowing ring hovered. Steam rose around them. No one moved. No one breathed. And then, lightning split the sky overhead. White flash turning the scene into a frozen photograph of law, defiance, and fire caught in a single heartbeat. The registrar's arm stopped mid-press, halted by his own man. The glowing seal hissed inches above the girl's burned palm, heat shimmering between brass and skin. Rain hammered down, steam rising where drops hit metal. The registrar's eyes snapped to the hand gripping him. "Release," he said coldly. The officer didn't. His voice was low, steady. "We swore to uphold order, not to burn breath." The registrar's jaw tightened. "Disobedience," he warned, "punishable." The officer didn't let go. "So punish," he said. "But I won't press children." The registrar looked past him, at the girl still shielding the wounded man, at the cowboy beside her, at the child with rope scars, at the Apache riders kneeling in mud, pressing their palms into earth like writing their own ledger. His fingers clenched around the seal. The ledger man stood motionless, ink sheet hanging at his side like a dead flag. "Sir," he said quietly. The rain took the ink. The registrar swallowed once. Rain streaked across his face, washing away whatever remained of clean uniform discipline. All around him, mud prints, burned palms, broken seal halves, lantern light flickering over free riders and lawmen both. The scene looked less like an arrest and more like a reckoning. The Apache rider holding the broken seal half-stepped forward. "Brand us," he said, voice like low thunder. "Or walk." The registrar's breath came slow, controlled, but something in his eyes flickered. He looked at the glowing ring, at the seal-bearer trembling beside him, at his own men wavering in rain, at the torch, now dead, at the coal, hissing but no longer blazing. Then he looked at the girl, burned, soaked, unbending. "You refuse record," he said. She met his gaze. "We refuse chains." The registrar's grip tightened one last time. Then he lifted the seal away. Steam twisted in the air like a ghost leaving coal. He let it fall. The glowing ring dropped into the mud with a soft hiss, half submerged beside the broken seal, half already lying there. 2 rings in dirt, one split, one scorched. The registrar stepped back. "State withdraws sealing," he said. The ledger man hesitated. "Do I log that?" he asked. The registrar looked at the ruined page in his hand, ink and rainwater bleeding into one dark smear. He dropped it. "Page is voidy," he said. The battered paper landed in the mud beside the seal, dissolving into pulp. Silence followed. Not victory, not surrender, something else. Apache riders lowered their hands. Scarred riders straightened. The cowboy exhaled slowly, knife lowering but not sheathed. The child leaned against the girl, still watching the fallen seal like it might leap up again. The registrar looked at his men. "Stand down," he ordered. Lanterns dimmed. Rifles lowered. No cheer, no relief. Just rain and breath, heavy in the quiet. The coal fire in the wagon sputtered and died at last. A final hiss, marking the end of something that could not be pressed into pages. The girl looked at the mud, at the 2 seals sinking beneath rainwater, disappearing into earth. Beside her, the cowboy murmured under his breath, almost to himself, "Unwritten." The registrar heard it, and this time he didn't argue. He turned and walked toward the dying torch, rain already erasing his footprints. Rain softened everything that had been sharp. Where fire once burned for law, only smoke now curled in thin trails across the mud. The 2 seals, one split, one scorched, lay half-buried beneath rising water, disappearing grain by grain as the land swallowed what the state had tried to stamp. The registrar did not look back. He walked with measured steps toward the ridge, bookkeeping tools hanging silent at his side. His men followed, not in parade order, not in honor, simply in quiet retreat. Lanterns dimmed, one by one, their light paling against the rain. The ledger man paused once, glancing down at the ruined page dissolving in mud. He bent as if to retrieve it, then stopped. His hand hovered above it a moment, fingers trembling. He let it sink and walked away. The injured man, once bound to the fence, breathed slow beneath the girl's coat. The cowboy kneeled, checking his pulse with quiet focus. "He'll live," he said. Storm cooled him. The girl rested a hand above his heart, her burned palm leaving a faint smear of ash and rainwater on his skin. "He lives without ink," she said. "That's enough." The child stood beside her, rope scars catching raindrops like silver beads. She stared at the mud where the seals were buried. "Will they dig it back up?" she asked. The girl shook her head. "Let them try," she said. "The land keeps what it wants." The Apache riders began to move, not in retreat, not in charge, simply turning their horses westward, away from the penned circle, toward open earth that asked no papers and took no names. One of them, the one who brought the broken seal, passed by the girl. He held the other half one last time, then dropped it gently into the mud beside the scorched ring. "2 halves," he said, "2 refusals." She nodded once. "Both enough." The lone rider who first stepped from the dust looked at the girl, at the cowboy, at the child. His voice was low. "Road stays unwritten from here." The cowboy rose, lifting the injured man onto his back once more, not as burden, not as claim, simply as choice. We walk. Rain washed over them, quiet now, almost gentle, less like storm, more like baptism. The girl stepped forward, the child at her side, barefoot in mud that no longer felt like prison ground. Behind them, no torches burned, no ledgers opened, no seal waited, only open land, only breath, only footsteps. They walked, and no one wrote it down. The mud squelched beneath their feet, swallowing each step without memory. No trail was left behind, just water and soil shifting, erasing all signs they had ever stood beneath a torch or ledger. The storm rolled further across the plains, wind tugging at torn cloth, tugging at breath like it meant to carry it onward. The Apache riders fanned out as they moved, not marching, not guarding, simply riding beside, as if escorting breath itself away from the reach of ink. They did not speak in commands. They spoke in glances, in nods. In the soft rustle of horsehide and rain, the child rubbed her wrists where rope scars still stung. She looked once more at the circle they left behind, the place where seals sank like stones. "Does it stay buried?" she asked. The cowboy didn't answer with words at first. He stepped once more, letting mud close over the prints. Then he looked down at her, rain trailing down his face. "It stays where we leave it," he said. The girl added, voice like low thunder, "And we leave it here." Thunder rolled again, farther now, moving across another valley. The sky no longer felt heavy. The air smelled of wet sage and scorched brass cooling in soil. The registrar's party had stopped at the ridge. They didn't chase. They didn't reload rifles. They stood beneath the dead torch, looking smaller against the horizon, like clerks left with tools that no longer mattered. The ledger man knelt beside the mud, touching the earth where the seal had fallen. His fingers came away dark, stained not with ink, but with earth itself. He looked at the mark on his fingertips, expression unreadable. The registrar glanced back once, coat heavy with water, eyes on the fading silhouettes walking west. Rain traced the lines of his face like something washing away the last of his certainty. He could rebuild seals. He could rewrite ledgers. But he could not gather mud once it had swallowed the page. The land had chosen its own record. The girl did not look back. The cowboy did not pause. The child, small but unbroken, matched their steps in silence. The wounded man's breath steadied against the cowboy's shoulder, each inhale a quiet victory against everything that had tried to number him. Ahead, the sky opened wider, rinsed clean by storm. No banners, no trail markers, just horizon, a simple place. A place wide enough for breath. And as they moved, their footsteps found rhythm with the Apache riders, not as a unit, not as a nation, not as a recorded group, but as a line of moving fire, walking without permission, not submitted, not sealed, only alive, only unwritten. If you walked this far through rain, rope, and unbroken breath, stay close. There are more roads where ink and dust collide, more stories where law meets fire and fire walks away unbranded. Come back to the fire when the next tale rises on the horizon. Subscribe, rate, and ride with the next story before any hand tries to write it for you.